Hello there, I'm Tyler Griffeth, and this is my submission for the Hauntings contest 2023 called Lake Pontchartrain. Lake Pontchartrain. You think you might not know it, but you do. Lake Pontchartrain is the lake that had the levees on it that broke during Hurricane Katrina, and the waters that rushed forth nearly destroyed that entire city. You see, Lake Pontchartrain is a 666 square mile lake that is actually the remnant of a huge inland sea that stretched all the way up the Mississippi Valley into Ohio and is now shrunken down to this little remnant of its ancient self. But what might be living there in that ancient lake? Well, no man can say. I'll tell you how it happened. It was Darius and Nolan and me. We're just a bunch of friends from high school trying to get out of misery. We had spent our childhood mostly misspent like you do. We spent way too many afternoons at a lazy river instead of doing homework, and way too much time at football games rather than paying attention in class. Therefore, in our early 20s, we were doing heavy manual labor jobs out of high school, and we basically lived for the weekend. We, in the weekend in question, were headed south on the 55 to Louisiana. And a part of me knows that we really wanted to find a way or a place we could go to out of our nowhere town. But none of us ever said it out loud. Anyway, it was a clear day, fine day. We drove for a few hours, and what we really wanted to find was some out-of-the-way places on back roads where we could really get a flavor for the locals and for, of course, local home cooking. In the South, everybody understands that the best places are little, out-of-the-way, hole-in-the-wall places that only locals know about. So, we'd driven for a few hours. It was dinner time, and we found just such a place off the highway. And getting out of the car, we noticed, of course, that there was a lot of lichen coming down off the eaves, and it seemed a little bit more dilapidated than most. But that didn't bother us that much. When we walked in, the wet, mildewy smell was present, as well as everything was a little bit more dilapidated than usual. Holes in the upholstery and such. A little rusted out old radio was playing Southern Soul. "Sit down if you want something to eat, honeys." There came a voice from the back kitchen. It was unpleasantly fake, but the smell coming out of there of what was cooking was good enough that decided us to all sit down and give it a try. Darius and Nolan both had crawfish. I had chicken. It was certainly good. But what we remembered most about being in that place was we heard a distant clap of thunder. And that surprised us because it seemed like it was good weather before we went in. And then the lights flickered, and when the radio came back on, there was this strange radio commercial-like playing instead of our Southern Soul. And it said, "Come down to Lake Pontchartrain, rest your soul and feed your brain. That's where you will get to see everything the water can be. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain, wade to where the shallows break. That's where you will get to see everything the water can be." It repeated like this over and over. And that's what made it creepy. So we paid enough money to leave a decent tip and left cash on the table and got out of there. Well, we walked out under thick thunderheads, and as we got in the car and drove off and were about back to the highway, that's when the thunderhead broke. Now, This is rain in the south. I mean, wind howling, rain coming down in sheets thick as lead, as they say. That's where that saying comes from, is the south. Anyway, it's one of those nights where you think the whole world's going to hell. And we hadn't driven too long before Nolan admitted that he didn't exactly know where we were according to the map. So we pulled off near the Choctaw Motel to deliberate. And actually, Darius suggested we spend the night there, but it was just after dinner. None of us were tired. So we were trying to decide where we should go and what we should do. So we're looking at the map. And all of a sudden, Nolan freezes. And he's looking out the window to the right of the car, out at the bayou. And we follow his gaze and we see a man stumbling out of the water like the lake had a tongue. And before we knew it, he's right up on the glass, all black-eyed, black teeth, yellow-eyed, banging on the windows, screaming at the top of his lungs. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Rest your soul and feed your brain. That's where you'll get to see everything the water can be. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Free for you and all your friends. Crawfish till the bitter end. Wade to where the shallows break. That's where you will get to see everything the water can be. Well, I was driving out of there just as fast as a Camry could. And it wasn't long, about a quarter mile down the highway, that we saw the flashing emergency lights letting us know that the highway was closed because of the flooding. Well, there was one little dirt road heading off the highway to our right, and we looked back in panic because we weren't too far from where we had seen this man, about a quarter mile, and we thought we could see a stumbling figure still coming out of us, out there towards us. So we head on this dirt road about as fast as we can. Now, to be fair, a dirt road in the rain at the night in the woods, bad move in retrospect. Okay, and the road, it wasn't long until it was completely washed out, and we're driving through what's really a shallow river through the woods. And we're following it because it seems to be leading us by the most direct course through the woods. But it turns out we shouldn't have trusted the water. We followed this river for about 20 minutes. And I had this moment of pure, pristine hope when it looked like we had driven out of the woods and we'd come to this big clearing. But I stood on the brakes and my heart skipped a beat when we saw the sign, Lake Pontchartrain. Well, we sat there in horror and watched the lake thrash and smash in what we thought was the fury of the storm. And everything happened at that point in like 2 seconds. It was all too quick for me to respond or react. Darius was yelling that he saw somebody out in the swells, and he jumped out running from the car, and Nolan was going as well. And I jumped up and, come back! Why the heck would they leave the car? That's what happens in horror movies, and the people get wasted. Anyway, I watched in horror as they start going out into the water, and that's when I heard it. Make no mistake, I know what I heard. The voices were coming up from under the lake. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Quiet at first. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Then louder, more insistent. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. Come down to Lake Pontchartrain. The crawfish were screaming. The waves danced and thrashed. And as my friends walked in, the water seemed to climb them. And then I watched in horror as horribly roaring the water opened up and pulled them down inside the lake. And they were gone, eaten by that terrible lake. And that's how it happened. Why would I lie? There were no bodies. I've got none to hide. I'm just a kid who lost his friends in the rain. And if you've got any more smart alecky questions, go and ask Lake Pontchartrain.